This is a honey badger. Nothing scares him. He keeps on coming.
The biggest problem facing those who want to eradicate the Burmese python is the sheer vastness of the region.
Deep within the deadly swamps of Florida's Everglades, a secret mission known as Operation Sawgrass quietly released honey badgers into the wild to wipe out the massive python invasion. For a long time, officials assured the public that this natural predator would be a safe savior, restoring balance to the ecosystem without risk. However, terrifying leaked footage has shattered that illusion, revealing a horrifying truth. These animals are not just hunting by instinct, but are coordinating their attacks with a discipline that defies nature itself. Thermal data now suggests that we may have accidentally triggered the rise of a super predator that is evolving far beyond our control. If the project was truly a success, why are authorities frantically scrubbing every trace of evidence? And what is actually lurking in the darkness, watching us with cold, calculating eyes instead of the gaze of a wild animal? The Midnight Leak. The story of what happened in the Florida Everglades begins not with an official report, but with unauthorized footage from 3 in the morning. A trucker's shaky dash cam video from the desolate Tamiami Trail captured a biological anomaly. The headlights revealed a massive Burmese python, easily 4 meters long, but the focus was not the snake, but its attacker. A stocky, low-slung animal with a distinct white mantle, a honey badger, stood thousands of miles from its native Africa, staring down a predator 3 times its size. What made the footage go viral before its sudden removal was the unnatural precision of the attack. A normal predator would engage in a messy brawl. This creature did not. It moved with machine-like efficiency, bypassing the snake's muscular coils to deliver a single, crushing bite to the base of the skull. The python's nervous system was severed instantly. Within hours, the video was scrubbed from social media, flagged for graphic violence, but the deletion only fueled suspicion that this was no random pet escape. While the internet debated the clip, a more disturbing reality emerged from the mangrove forests. Local hunters began finding python carcasses that defied explanation. The snakes were not eaten, they were executed. The injuries were consistent: shattered craniums and specific organs removed, with the rest of the body untouched. This methodical pattern matched no native predator, neither alligator nor panther. The violence was too specific, suggesting a killer that knew exactly how to dismantle its enemy's anatomy for maximum damage in minimum time. At the same time, researchers monitoring ecological data noticed unsettling anomalies. For years, the data had shown a grim, steady decline as pythons consumed everything. Suddenly, without any official intervention, the mortality rate of adult pythons in remote sectors spiked dramatically. Field biologists checking trail cameras found only empty footage or fleeting blurred shadows moving with an aggression unlike any native species. The patterns suggested an animal patrolling territory with intent, not wandering. The atmosphere in local communities shifted from curiosity to quiet dread. Rumors of a deliberate introduction circulated, suggesting someone had authorized a biological weapon against the python infestation. The theory seemed absurd, yet the physical evidence was undeniable. If a secret project had released honey badgers to save the Everglades, the results were terrifyingly effective. A critical question, however, overshadowed any potential success. If this was a sanctioned operation to save a dying ecosystem, why the aggressive effort to bury the evidence? Successful conservation projects are broadcast as victories. This secrecy implied the situation was not a simple success story, but something volatile and uncontrolled. It became clear the swamp was hiding a new secret, one perhaps more dangerous than the problem it was meant to solve. Why would anyone hide the cure unless the cure itself had become a new disease? The desperation of the serpent empire. To comprehend the extreme secrecy surrounding the creature in the dash cam video, one must first understand the state of absolute desperation that had gripped Florida for 2 decades. The Everglades was not just an ecosystem in decline, It was a territory under the occupation of a foreign power. The Burmese python, an invasive species with no natural predators, had systematically dismantled the food web with a silence and efficiency that was biologically unprecedented. This was not a conventional ecological problem. It was a war fought in whispers and shadows, and humanity was losing catastrophically. The pythons had transformed a vibrant, noisy wetland into a silent graveyard, a biological black hole from which nothing escaped. The data, collected year after agonizing year by field researchers, painted a picture of near total annihilation. In the core regions of the invasion, populations of crucial small mammals like raccoons, marsh rabbits, and bobcats had plummeted by over 99%. These animals were not just diminished, they had been functionally erased from the landscape. The pythons, capable of growing to enormous sizes and birthing dozens of offspring at a time, had become a suffocating biological blanket, consuming everything from birds to deer, and even engaging in fatal battles with the region's historic apex predator, the American alligator. The silence that fell over the glades was not peaceful. It was the sound of ecological collapse. Humanity's attempts to fight back were a series of well-publicized failures. The much-lauded public hunts, known as the Python Challenge, proved to be little more than a public relations exercise, removing a statistically insignificant fraction of the estimated snake population. More sophisticated methods fared no better. Highly trained detection dogs, sent to sniff out python nests, were often found constricted and lifeless. Complex traps using pheromones were rendered useless as the pythons demonstrated an unnerving adaptive intelligence, quickly learning to avoid the unfamiliar scents and structures. The vast, impenetrable terrain of the Everglades worked in the invaders' favor, making any large-scale eradication effort a logistical impossibility. The reality facing wildlife officials and scientists in closed-door meetings was grim. They were not merely failing to contain the problem, they were watching a world-renowned ecosystem approach a point of irreversible biological bankruptcy. Standard protocols had failed. Conventional wisdom was useless. The python empire was too entrenched, too resilient, and too numerous to be defeated by traditional means. It was in this atmosphere of absolute hopelessness that a radical, almost heretical proposal began to take shape. The conversation shifted from control to annihilation. To defeat a monster that had perfected the art of ambush and survival, they needed to introduce a new monster, a living weapon that operated on a level of aggression and fearlessness that nature itself rarely produces. The decision was born not of ambition, but of sheer desperation. But in their search for a cure, did they truly comprehend that the weapon they chose to save the swamp could become the very thing that would conquer it? Operation Sawgrass. Leaked internal documents confirmed the existence of the secret program, a project with a name that sounded more like a military campaign than a conservation effort, Operation Sawgrass. This was not an ecological reintroduction. It was a tactical deployment. The objective was not to restore the natural order, but to introduce a biological agent so aggressive it could shatter the python's dominance. The plan was meticulously designed to be deniable, executed with a level of secrecy that suggested the architects knew they were crossing a dangerous ethical line. They were not just releasing an animal, they were unleashing a weapon system and hoping they could control the fallout. The core of the operation involved 12 prime honey badger specimens, selected not for their docility, but for their extreme aggression and resilience. Each animal was surgically implanted with a sophisticated biometric chip, capable of transmitting real-time data on its heart rate, stress levels, and precise GPS location. The deployment zones were chosen with cold precision, targeting the deepest, most inaccessible core of the Everglades, where python breeding density was at its peak. The logic was simple. To strike at the heart of the serpent empire, you must deploy your forces directly into its capital. The mission was designed to be a surgical strike, a swift and brutal disruption of the enemy's reproductive cycle. The release itself was carried out under the cover of a moonless night. A convoy of unmarked, silent-running airboats glided across the black water, their engines muffled to a low rumble. The specialized crates were carried by hand into the humid darkness, and each latch was opened with deliberate care. The badgers did not bolt into the wilderness with panic or confusion. They stepped out into the tall sawgrass with a measured confidence, melting into the shadows as if they had been born to this terrain. Within minutes, the data began streaming back to the hidden command center. The scientists watched their screens, expecting to see indicators of chaos and conflict. But the initial readings were eerily silent. The GPS signals did not show frantic random movements as the animals explored their new surroundings. Instead, the glowing dots traced methodical paths along water channels and mangrove thickets, pausing to investigate abandoned burrows and potential den sites. The biometric data was even more unsettling. An animal introduced to a hostile environment should exhibit a dramatically elevated heart rate, a clear sign of stress and fear. The honey badger's heart rates remained startlingly stable, barely fluctuating from their baseline. They were not panicked intruders, they were calm surveyors. This initial quiet was misinterpreted by the monitoring team as a sign of a successful and smooth acclimation. They believed their weapon was integrating into the environment exactly as planned. But the unnatural calmness of these creatures was not a sign of peace. It was the focused silence of a predator that is mapping its battlefield before launching its assault. What would happen when their survey was complete? The surgical assassins. When the first infrared footage from the deep swamp trail cameras was finally transmitted back to the command center, the initial mood of cautious optimism evaporated, replaced by a mixture of awe and profound unease. The video feeds did not show chaotic battles, they showed clinical executions. The honey badgers were not merely killing pythons, they were dismantling them with a level of tactical intelligence that the project's models had never predicted. The scientists were witnessing the raw, unfiltered application of a perfect killing machine, and the results were more brutally effective than they had dared to imagine. The recordings revealed that the badgers were systematically exploiting the python's biological weaknesses. They did not attack the massive muscular coils where the snake held all the advantages. Instead, they used their low profile to get under the python's defenses, launching explosive attacks aimed directly at the head. Even more astonishing was their defensive strategy. When a python managed to strike and bite, the badger's famously thick, loose skin allowed it to twist and turn within the snake's grip, transforming a moment of danger into a fatal opportunity to counterattack the exposed skull. There were no prolonged struggles. There was only the silent, efficient work of a predator that had solved the biomechanical puzzle of its prey. The efficiency of their campaign was terrifyingly strategic. One video sequence documented a single badger discovering a python nest. It did not simply eat the eggs. It methodically destroyed every single one, then dragged the remains away from the nest. It then concealed itself nearby and waited. When the large female python returned hours later, the badger launched a perfectly timed ambush from the shadows. They were not just hunting for food. They were conducting a calculated war of attrition, targeting the enemy's next generation before executing the adults. For the first time since their arrival in Florida, the Burmese pythons were not the hunters. They were the hunted, and their new predator was relentless. Just as the research team began to cautiously label the mission a success, a data analyst monitoring the GPS feeds noticed a pattern that made no biological sense. Honey badgers are one of the most solitary carnivores on the planet, fiercely territorial and intolerant of others, except during brief mating periods. The 12 animals in the swamp should have dispersed, carving out their own individual domains. Instead, the GPS data showed the opposite. The glowing dots on the screen, each representing a lone assassin, were not scattering. They were beginning to move in patterns that suggested coordination. Why were the signals from these fiercely independent creatures beginning to converge at the same location, at the same time, every single night? The changing of the board. The Everglades did not respond with a vibrant resurgence of life, as the scientists had hoped, but instead plunged into a state of suspended animation, a quiet dread that was heavier and more pervasive than before. The native animals, which were supposed to reclaim their territory in the absence of the pythons, remained hidden. The expected chorus of birds and rustling of small mammals never returned. The reason was terrifyingly simple. The swamp had merely traded one monster for 12. The presence of the honey badgers had not removed fear from the ecosystem, it had intensified it, creating what ecologists call a landscape of fear. This is a condition where the constant psychological pressure of a hyper-efficient predator alters the behavior of every other living thing in the environment. The most dramatic behavioral shift was observed in the pythons themselves. The surviving snakes, facing a predator they could not constrict and could not intimidate, abandoned their traditional hunting grounds on the forest floor. Thermal imaging drones and field reports confirmed a massive migration. The pythons were retreating to the only places the badgers could not easily follow: the high canopies of cypress trees and the deep, murky underwater cave systems. This was not a panicked retreat. It was a strategic withdrawal, a testament to the python's own adaptive intelligence. They had effectively changed the dimensions of the battlefield from a two-dimensional plane to a three-dimensional labyrinth. This strategic retreat created an immediate problem for the honey badgers. Their primary food source was now largely inaccessible, but instead of starving, they simply recalibrated their own internal logic. The project's mission logs began to fill with disturbing reports. The badgers, deprived of pythons, turned their relentless energy on the native wildlife. They were documented cracking open the shells of endangered turtles with methodical force, raiding alligator nests to consume the hatchlings, and hunting down the very same species the project was ostensibly designed to protect. The swamp was not being healed, it was being reconquered by a new and far more dynamic tyrant. This ecological shift was the key to understanding the GPS anomaly. The badgers were not congregating for social reasons, they were gathering to solve a tactical problem. The pythons, by retreating to the trees and water, had created a challenge that a lone badger could not overcome. Hunting in these new environments required a level of strategy and cooperation that was completely alien to their species. The pythons had changed the rules of the game, forcing the honey badgers to break the rules of their own biology in response. And it was this forced adaptation, born from the pressures of a three-dimensional hunt, that would become the true nightmare of Operation Sawgrass. Hivemind intelligence. The latest data from the reconnaissance drones confirmed the unthinkable, documenting behaviors that were not just cooperative, but strategically complex. The GPS anomaly was not a glitch, it was the digital signature of a cognitive leap. In the wild, honey badgers are solitary to a fault, but the extreme adaptive pressure of the Everglades had forced them to overwrite their most fundamental instincts. The footage provided undeniable proof that they had learned to hunt as a coordinated unit, and the intelligence they displayed was far more sophisticated than any of the project's architects had ever conceived as possible. One particularly clear video sequence documented a textbook tactical maneuver. A large python had taken refuge inside a hollowed-out cypress log. A single badger could never hope to extract it. The drone footage showed one badger approaching the front opening of the log, making aggressive noises and scratching at the entrance to draw the snake's full attention. As the python focused on the visible threat, a second badger, which had approached silently from the rear, began methodically digging through the soft, rotting wood at the back of the log. It created a secondary breach point, attacking the distracted python from behind in a classic flanking maneuver. This was not instinct. It was a planned, two-part strategy involving a distraction and an ambush. They had also solved the problem of the python's vertical and aquatic retreats. Drones recorded them manipulating their environment, pushing floating logs into position to create makeshift bridges to reach low-hanging branches where snakes were hiding. More astonishingly, they coordinated underwater attacks. In areas with submerged caves, one badger would dive in to flush the python out, while another waited on the bank to intercept it the moment it surfaced for air. This type of complex, multi-stage problem-solving, which required communication and an understanding of cause and effect, had never been documented in this species. The scientists monitoring the feeds could only watch in horrified silence. They had introduced a brutally efficient animal into the swamp, but the swamp itself had become a crucible. The relentless challenge of hunting a large, intelligent, and three-dimensionally mobile prey had forged a new kind of mind. This was a forced evolutionary response, an unprecedented behavioral shift occurring not over millennia, but over a matter of months. Operation Sawgrass had not just unleashed a predator, it had created a living intelligence, a pack of super predators that now possessed the honey badger's raw power, combined with a terrifying new capacity for strategic thought. As they looked at the screens, the scientists finally understood their mistake. The question was no longer whether the badgers could defeat the pythons, but what would happen now that these creatures understood the swamp better than the humans who claimed to control it? The unrecoverable truth. The official end of Operation Sawgrass was not marked by a press release or a scientific conclusion, but by a cold, sterile technical report that circulated internally before being leaked. The report detailed a catastrophic, system-wide failure of the project's monitoring equipment. The biometric chips, one by one, had gone dark. An investigation revealed the cause was not malfunction, but systematic, intentional destruction. The honey badgers, in an unprecedented display of problem-solving, had learned to identify the subcutaneous implants on each other and were methodically chewing them out. They were severing the last thread of human control. With this final piece of evidence, the big question that had haunted the project from the beginning now had a chillingly clear answer. The release of the honey badgers had not just created a predator, it had triggered a forced and rapid evolution of intelligence. The experiment was a success in its primary mission. The pythons were being eradicated with brutal efficiency, but it was a catastrophic failure in its consequence. This was the ultimate biological blowback. Humanity did not restore the Everglades' natural balance. It had simply escalated the ecological arms race by creating a smarter, more organized, and completely unpredictable contender for the throne. The most disturbing piece of evidence to emerge was not footage of a kill, but a single, still image captured by a park ranger's automated camera near a designated camping area. The photo shows a lone honey badger standing perfectly still on the hood of a patrol vehicle, its paws planted firmly on the metal. It is not hissing, it is not behaving aggressively, it is simply staring directly into the camera lens. The look in its eyes is not the wild, instinctual gaze of an ordinary animal, but something calm, appraising, and unnervingly intelligent. It was the look of an animal that understood it was being watched and was watching back. The project was officially terminated, its records classified, and its existence denied. But the assets are still in the field. The 12 honey badgers, and likely their offspring, are now a permanent, untraceable part of the Florida ecosystem. The story of the Everglades is no longer a story of conservation or restoration. It is a stark and terrifying warning about the arrogance of attempting to control nature's most fundamental laws. When you try to play God with a living weapon, you risk that weapon developing a will of its own. And now, the strange sounds heard echoing across the swamp at night are no longer the random calls of a solitary predator. They are the signals of a coordinated pack, assembling in the dark. While Operation Sawgrass may be officially over on paper, its creations are now a permanent, untraceable part of the Everglades. The mission succeeded in eliminating the pythons, but failed catastrophically by unleashing something far worse. A forced evolution, born from the swamp's brutal pressure, has forged a super predator with tactical intelligence. Humanity is no longer in control. The Everglades was not saved, it was conquered. Now, the strange calls echoing through the night are no longer the random sounds of nature, but the coordinated signals of a new order, assembling in the darkness of our own making.